Hello, and welcome to Partners Beyond Parenthood, the podcast that helps new parents thrive without losing themselves. My name is Saba Bazuner, and today's episode touches on a slightly more delicate topic: high-risk pregnancies, preterm birth, and loss. My guest today is an incredibly compassionate and determined mother, as well as a best-selling author, Parijat Deshpande. Thank you so much for being here today. Welcome to Partners Beyond Parenthood. Really grateful that you're taking the time. And I'd love for you to just start off by introducing yourself with your name and what you're currently doing.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. I'm Parijat Deshpande, and I'm the founder of Ruvelle, the only truly trauma-informed company that's dedicated to improving high-risk pregnancy outcomes and helping parents pass on generational health through our trauma-informed approach and neurobiological approach to somatic health, overall health, and navigating healthcare. Got into this work because of personal experiences. Would not have known that this work was needed in the world had I not been through it all. And, you know, life and professional life come together, and here we are.
And here we are. And I mean, that's quite an incredible thing to be the only one thus far, I guess, of what you've said. Is that in the United States?
It's globally. There are a lot of companies that do pregnancy in general. There's many of those. There are a handful that specifically focus on high-risk pregnancies, but they're not actually truly trauma-informed. And so we are the only one that has that intersection between the two.
Wow. I mean, that's incredible that you found that gap and that you're filling it and, you know, helping people who are in need, because clearly there is a need. I'd love to ask you, because this wasn't my case, but how would you actually define a high-risk pregnancy?
Yeah, the term is actually kind of a useless term, if you will, because it's so vague. It means a lot of different things. So high risk can mean in the United States if you're over 35, and that's it. And that may be enough to qualify as high risk. It can be because you're carrying twins or triplets or higher order multiples. It can be because you're pregnant after preterm birth, or because you have a history of health complications like cancer or kidney disease, autoimmune disease, asthma, depression, things like that. It can be because everything is going completely smoothly fine. You're low risk until you're high risk, meaning something changed either in your health or baby's health or both during pregnancy that puts you at risk for additional complications. So it's really a term that means you're probably going to have some added monitoring just so you have some opportunities to have early intervention if needed.
Based from your experience, how would you say that it is actually approached? Like, once someone realizes, okay, this could qualify as a high-risk pregnancy, at what point do you see doctors actually intervene and say, perhaps we need some more monitoring? In your experience, have you seen that this happens too late, to not at all? Or is this something that someone would actually need to request more?
I think it depends on the circumstances. In a lot of cases, I've seen it as a proactive approach. So because there's a known history of something that will add risk to future pregnancies, those people have already had the conversation with their providers to say, okay, next time we will be high risk. This is what it will mean. This is what it might mean. This is what we'll have to do. I think where I see it happening too late is very often with patients who have no history of any kind of risk factors or no known history, or it's a history that isn't really looked at very carefully by providers. And then something goes wrong in the middle of the pregnancy. And this is especially so, I think, for patients who identify as Black, Indigenous, or other people of color, where they're trying to get the attention, and because there is no known history, they're more likely to be waved off as, well, we'll see. This is especially troublesome, I think, in the United States, where insurance drives a lot of this too, and where people need to advocate even more than I think they should have to for that. Generally speaking, with the people that I work with, though, it is much more proactive than that. And all we have to do is help kind of massage that experience so that they get the best of that care as early as possible.
At Ruvelle, do people come and see you alongside the visits that they would have at the hospital, or is that something that you provide as well?
Yeah, so I used to work with clients directly before I created Ruvelle, and that's kind of what ended up turning into Ruvelle, is that I couldn't see enough people by myself to be able
Right.
to have the impact that I wanted. So at Ruvelle, what we do is we've actually taken everything that I have done with my private clients and productized it. So we have journals and workbooks and courses and things that they can do alongside the medical care that they're already receiving. And the intention of that is to fill the gaps of that medical care and to help them navigate that medical care so they get the best care possible.
That's awesome. Do you usually have clients that come just the mothers, or is that something that you require that they perhaps come with their partners, or how does that work?
Yeah, it's typically the birthing person is the one who ends up working with me. We do have opportunities for partner support if they have a partner. So every month I get to do a Q&A with them if they want. I have done somatic work with the partners to help them with their birth trauma from their previous experiences so they can be a more present partner for their next pregnancies. So that has definitely been possible. But primarily the work that I do is with the pregnant person themselves.
You mentioned a word that has been coming up a lot for me recently that I actually hadn't heard of, I don't know, maybe a few weeks ago, somatic. Could you please go ahead and explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, somatic is also another almost useless word like high-risk pregnancy because it can mean so many different things. It is used a lot, so I'm not surprised you're starting to hear it. People are just kind of throwing it around everywhere. Somatic in and of itself just means of the body, so it's body-based. Anything can be body-based. So somebody who teaches breath work is doing somatic work. Somebody who does massage therapy is doing body work. A yoga teacher is doing body work. A fitness instructor is doing somatic work, right? That word in and of itself really doesn't tell you the kind of work that somebody's doing.
Okay.
But it's a nice shorthand to go, we're not doing work of the mind or the brain or the thoughts or the behavior. What we're doing is body-based.
Okay, well, thank you for clarifying that because I've been seeing it and I'm just like, wait, I've seen this in quite a few different contexts now. Now I'm getting a little bit confused, but thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. I'd love to ask a little bit about your experience, I guess, leading up to Ruvelle.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's interesting because when I think back to when it all started, I was like 7 or 8 years old and I knew I wanted to work in women's health. I wanted to be an OBGYN.
Wow.
And I knew that because my best friend's dad is an OBGYN and I just loved everything he would share about, obviously he would share the happy stories. I loved everything he was doing. And I loved that he was part of the process of bringing a new life into this world. And I just loved it. So throughout my junior high and high school, all my project interviews would be interviewing him about, well, what do you do at your job?
Wow.
Tell me more about what you do. And then I got to college and then I tried chemistry and I went, okay, clearly this is not meant for me. So
Okay.
new path. What are we going to do now? So I took a detour. First, I thought I was going to go into developmental psychology and I loved it. But before I was able to teach that, I actually went from developmental psychology into clinical psychology, which was a different detour that I had not expected, but something that one of my mentors had said, you think you have the skills for this. I think you'll be really good at it. And I was resisting it completely. I said, no, I don't want to sit in a room listening to people's problems all day long. No, thank you. But he was very good at getting through to me, making me think this was my idea. So
That's usually how it works.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, I see why you're so accomplished in your field. So, went through graduate school in clinical psychology and that nugget of women's health was always in the back of my head, but I couldn't quite get in yet. And I thought, I don't know how to do this yet, but I thought I had time. So I pursued the teaching route first. I was teaching developmental psychology. And I still, to this day, I look back and I go, I was teaching to students what it's like to raise a child that was born under 2 pounds, under 1 pound. Why does preterm birth happen? What is the developmental path for children who are born preterm? And I felt very confident in what I was teaching because I had done enough work to learn about it on paper. And then I became the parent of that child. And I remember looking back going, I would teach that class entirely differently now. I always say that I went to college, I went to grad school, and then I went through Life University. And that was my experience of primary and secondary infertility. The first time I got pregnant, it ended in a ruptured ectopic pregnancy, which is when the embryo implants outside of the uterus. For me, it was in one of my fallopian tubes, which is a medical emergency. And it was the first time that I realized that my life could be in danger. Nobody had talked about my life could be in danger if we did this, if we tried to grow our family. And so that was very scary for both of us to come to terms with. And so we went through one round of IVF. I got pregnant with our first round, thankfully, but had a very complicated pregnancy with 8 different complications that ended extremely preterm. My son was born at 24 weeks and 5 days. And then we had a lengthy NICU stay after that. And then we had, we're very, very lucky that he survived. And we were able to bring him home. And then there was a whole other phase that nobody talked about of how do you raise this child? Right. And how do you navigate being a new parent while also navigating being a preemie parent, a micro preemie parent at that.
Right.
And that was such a difficult time of trying to find a new identity, recovering from the trauma that I'd been through before. And all of that really is what inspired the work that I started doing initially, was just one-on-one client work to teach people how to help themselves have a healthier pregnancy, especially when they're high risk, and how to help them stay pregnant even when their doctors are telling them, I think it's over. Because that's what happened to me. I landed in the hospital at 22 weeks and 4 days. I was 3 centimeters dilated, which, if anybody is unfamiliar, that's very dilated for that early in pregnancy. Uh-huh. And you could see the contractions on the monitor, and I realized that when I did my version of what I could figure out how to do on my own somatically, while I'm lying upside down in a hospital bed for 15 days, the contraction stopped. And when I didn't do it, they picked back up. And it wasn't a matter of relaxing. It was actually a matter of releasing the tension that was in my body in a very specific way. And so they told me I was going to deliver probably before 23 weeks. And we were able to make it to 24 and 5, which is still very, very early, but late enough that it gave them a chance at life. And I went, there's got to be something here. This can't be magic. I mean, maybe I just got really lucky. That's entirely possible. So before I started working with my clients, I went, I want to validate this, right? My science brain was always going, like, what is behind this? Mm-hmm. And in that journey, I found there's 70 years of research that shows the connection between the nervous system, the endocrine system, and the immune system, and the risk for pregnancy complications, including preterm birth. And I went, how are we not talking about this? Nobody's told me it. Nobody had this conversation with me. So I started working with clients. They had the same results, that they were told they were going to deliver at a certain time or a certain complication would definitely arise. And because of our work together, it didn't happen. And they stayed pregnant longer. I thought, okay, clearly there's something here. Wanted to get the work out more pervasively in the world. I wanted more people to know that this is possible. So I wrote my book, Pregnancy Brain. And from there, it just kind of grew. And I got more and more and more clients. And we got to a point, which is a wonderful point to be in business, but also a scary one, where I realized I can't do this by myself. It wasn't feeling enough. Like, the mission here is too big for what I can do alone. Mm-hmm. And so last year we pivoted away from this kind of client-centered one-on-one model to Ruvelle, where we're taking everything that I have learned, all the research, all the client work, all the personal work, and productizing everything so that it's available at whatever stage somebody may need as they're going through this process to help them beat their medical odds.
Right. I mean, education is everything, right? Being able to provide resources and just helping people prepare for something that is so unexpected. And you mentioned this quite early on of your explanation. You said from when you were lecturing before you had your baby and then after, you would have done it totally different. Can you give an example?
Yeah. So I can still picture the page of the textbook, right? There's like 3 paragraphs on preterm birth in that developmental psychology textbook. So one, I would pick a totally different source for people to go to. And I can still picture that page where they're talking about how the survival rate of babies born under 2 pounds was, at the time, I don't remember the exact number, but it was, it's very low. Mm-hmm. And then immediately following that is, but those that survive are at risk of XYZ complications, all these developmental complications, learning disabilities, emotional issues, ADHD, all growth issues, gross motor issues, and just like a laundry list of things. And what I would like to bring back to that actually is it's not that simple. It's not at all that simple. And one of the things that I've learned just having gone through it myself is there's statistics, there's information, there's numbers, there's raw data that we can look at, but that does not mean it is a guarantee. And I think what I want to bring back to that conversation is how do you navigate the real world when the data says you have a 50% chance of XYZ complication growing up or raising that child? And how do you balance that with, well, how can my ability to raise that child in certain environments reduce that risk? Because that's real.
Right.
These are not numbers that are set in stone. We have to consider the fact that it's a very specific demographic that's usually studied in these studies, and we don't have ethnic diversity, we don't have socioeconomic diversity. I would like to bring those nuances back into the conversation, And I would like to bring to the table this idea that the lived experience can never match what you're going to read on paper. So I would bring in my stories. I would tell them what it was actually like, and I would show them that this is something that I remember even bothered me back then, is it's almost framed like, well, when you're quote unquote that kind of person, this is more likely to happen to you. And what does that kind of person mean? Well, maybe somebody who doesn't take care of themselves, maybe doesn't have access to prenatal care, or, something that a lot of people go, that can't happen to me. And it did. It happened to me. It happened to me, somebody who had access to all of this care and somebody who has never had alcohol before. And, all these stereotypes that we put together, I want to put a face to that and go, that's not how this works. Yes, those things add risk, but it could be you too. And these are the things that I want you to know about that, in real life.
So pardon my ignorance here. In general, what is the belief of... who's predisposed to be at high risk? Obviously, there's plus 35 generally, but are there other things in general other than, what is commonly known?
So for preterm birth, you're asking?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there are known risk factors, right? We know that if you are using alcohol or recreational drugs, that increases your risk. If you're low or high BMI, for whatever credence we give to BMI, right? That increases your risk. If you smoke during pregnancy, it increases your risk. Not taking the appropriate vitamins or having enough nutrients in your diet, supplements, access to good prenatal care, regular prenatal care, all of those things. The work that I do also shows that stress is a risk factor. And we don't like to talk about that because that people assume that means, well, then I'm causing the preterm birth. And that's not what I mean when we say stress. It's stress physiology. It is the physiological changes that happen when we live in a society where we're living with racism all the time, when we're going into a medical system where there's systemic racism just built into our prenatal care, when we are living with childhood trauma, or we're living with developmental trauma of some kind, or shock traumas from before. That's what I mean by stress. So there's 70 years of research that's showing that. So those risk factors are real. They are there. If you had a history of preterm birth before, you're at risk for another preterm birth. It doesn't mean it's definitely going to happen and that you can't do anything about it.
Right, and that's the most important thing. Well, thanks first of all also for sharing that part of your story. Like you said, it's really important to get that out there for people to know that they can actually change the course of things and stay pregnant longer. On your own part, I can't even imagine how that must have felt, just what you were going through. And so my show, Partners Beyond Parenthood, also talks a lot about the partnership. And I'd love to hear a little bit, how do you manage that as a new parent together with your partner? And I mean, you can prepare for parenthood in the sense of like what people usually expect, but then that is a totally different type of parenthood, right? Like how do you yourself as a new parent and then with your partner manage that?
I don't know how we did it. Looking back, it's you're thrown into the middle of a hurricane, it feels like, and you're just given minimal guidance of what to do or what this is, and you just are kind of flying by the seat of your pants. And I think for us specifically, what we ended up doing, I don't think we even talked about it. I think it just kind of organically happened that I was involved more in the medical care. And I also didn't have a career anymore. That whole career that I'd built had to stop when I was pregnant. And so I no longer had a job and I had nothing else going on in my life, whereas my husband went kind of to work.
Right.
And I think in splitting it like that, it gave us just kind of like our own domains to go, okay, this is yours and this is mine. And in that way, it gave us kind of a leadership role, if you will. Like, I'm going to be in charge of these things for the family and you're going to be in charge of these things. And it helped with the mental load, honestly, because we knew what that delineation was. Where that broke down, though, is then once my son came home, and at some point I needed my husband to like take over some of the doctor's appointments because maybe I had my own appointment or I was exhausted or I wasn't feeling well or I just needed a break. And he hadn't built the confidence of what it's like to be with this tiny little medically fragile child by himself. Right. And I hadn't built the confidence in letting him do that and trusting that he'll know what to do. Right. So it was wholly imperfect. But I think in the survival state that we just kind of naturally gravitated toward our own strengths and it worked until it didn't. And then we had to renegotiate. Okay, now what do we do?
Right. Were there any resources that you were able to find to help for parents of preterm babies?
No.
None.
March of Dimes is always around. But I think what I didn't also know until I went through it is that we can't just look for preterm or preemie resources because my child was a very specific kind of preemie. Right. He was what we call a micro preemie. So he was less than 2 pounds. He was born before 26 weeks. He was teeny tiny, born at the edge of that periviable period, which is a very different kind of preemie than say one that's born at 28 weeks versus 32 weeks versus 36 weeks, right?
Yeah.
And so I couldn't find a place where I felt like I belonged. And so it felt very isolating and alone. Now there are organizations that are doing a lot better with that and who do have some of these split subgroups where you can kind of pair people together. And then thankfully, actually, our NICU introduced us to a couple of families who had babies around the same gestational age. And those friendships have been a lifeline. I think, those are friends that we have forever.
Of course. I mean, you have something so deeply in common that is so unusual that definitely connects you in a different way. Would you say that's typical of hospitals to give you access to that, or is that something that should actually be demanded more?
Yeah, right? I think it should be done way more. And I remember asking when we were very early on in the NICU, and I was like, who else is here that's going to be here for a long time? Tell me who they are. Right. There was no one. Not until that other family came along. But what they told me at the time was, for privacy reasons, we can't tell you. And I thought that was so frustrating because I'm not looking for that child's medical history. I'm not looking for any personal. I just want to talk to somebody who understands. Right. And I think since then many NICUs have developed more family-centered care. They've created more of these like family peer group type things that are often run by social workers at the hospital. And so that can be an opportunity where the hospital isn't making the introduction, but they're providing an opportunity for you all to come together, and then you can introduce yourselves, because then that kind of goes around the privacy laws. Yeah. I found that to be great, and also I would like that to be more accessible, because one thing for NICU parents is we are constantly overwhelmed to the point where we can't even make simple decisions sometimes of, should I go to this thing at 6:00 on a Thursday? I know it'll help me. I'll get to meet some people. Right. But I also don't want to leave my baby's side because the cardiologist might come and I need to talk to them. Right. So I think we're getting there, and I think there's more work to be done. Right.
Can you tell me a little bit more about what does your day-to-day look like when your baby's in the NICU? Like how, I know you said that you had a lot of time to dedicate towards being there for your son, which is great. Like, I'm really happy to hear that for you. But so for me, I can't imagine what that's like. Are you there literally every day? Do you only get certain hours? how do you divide that obviously also with your husband to actually see him? Like, how does that work?
So he was at two different hospitals, and the first one, we were there. I was there every single day except for one day when I hit a wall and I just, I was recovering from the delivery. I was recovering from 15 days on bed rest, and I just hadn't stopped, and my body stopped me for me. What I would do in the morning is around 7:30, after their morning rounds were done, I would call to check in to see how did the night go. And that morning nurse would update me and say, this is what happened overnight. This is what we're working on. These are our, goals for today or for the next hour. Even at the beginning, it was just kind of minute by minute, hour by hour. I would get ready, go to the hospital. I'd probably get there by about 7:45, 8 o'clock. And I would stay there until about 7 o'clock at night.
Wow.
And then my husband would come from work. And in the first hospital, we would be there together for a little bit, and then he would drive me home because I wasn't actually allowed to drive for quite some time after my delivery. So then he would drive me home, and then we would call again at night before we went to bed. How's he doing? What's going on? Tell us everything. And then as he got bigger and stronger, and then he had to move to another hospital in the last month of his stay, then we had a little bit more flexibility, but it was a more than full-time job to be there. And then when we were there, we would try to be as involved as possible, changing diapers around wires, talking to doctors, taking notes, being there for rounds if we could, making sure that we were involved in every decision that was possible, and then holding him as often as possible whenever he was stable enough to do so. So I didn't actually get to hold him for 19 days after birth because he was so sick. Yeah. And then it was off and on for a little while after that. But once he was strong enough, then it was every day, just as much as possible. I just got him on my chest and sitting there listening to music, reading a book or something with him.
I have to take a quick moment. Wow. I guess just amazing to see you on the other side of all of this. Like you said, it's more than a full-time job, because it's not just physically being in one place. Mentally, you're in also somewhere totally else that no one's ever prepared you for, that no one can really prepare you for, right? And also on top of that, it really sounds like you barely got to connect with your husband. I can't imagine how that must have taken a toll as well. How did you manage that?
I don't think we noticed at the time, truthfully. So we were just trying to get through the days. We were just trying to keep our eye on the ball of when can this baby come home? And we were in that phase for so long because he was born so early. So we were there for months doing it like this. We had times together on the weekend. We would be in the NICU together on the weekends. And then we would make sure that Friday nights or Saturday nights, we would watch something funny and ridiculous. And I often had to have him vet what it was, because sometimes there's a pregnancy storyline or a birth storyline that just comes out of left field. And I'm like, that's not what we were preparing for.
Don't need this, yeah.
We don't need this, no. Yeah. But no, I honestly don't think we noticed. It was just a head down, get it done kind of a thing.
Right.
And I don't think we really noticed until many months after he came home, because for 2.5 years after he was discharged from the NICU, he and I were on lockdown, so we couldn't go anywhere because he could not get risk of exposure to any kind of virus. Would have sent him right back to the hospital.
So what does that mean? That you were literally just in one home, or you had to limit where you would go, or? Yeah,
we could be anywhere outdoors, and we would go to medical appointments, and that was it. Nowhere else.
Wow. That's very isolating.
It's very isolating. Yeah, exactly.
So how did you go about that? Did you have people come to you? Was that possible?
We had to be very careful, just like we are right now in the pandemic that keeps going. We have to be very careful because people typically don't know when they're sick until it's too late.
Yeah.
And so we had to get really good about asking hard questions. How are you feeling? Do you have any symptoms? Doesn't matter if you think it's allergies, you can't come over. We had to get really good at saying no.
Yeah.
And we were very thankful that we had a lot of people in our life who understood that. They understood that they didn't understand what was happening with him, and they respected that. And we were very grateful for that. And we were very grateful for technology. That was really a big part of how the world and our family got to meet him for the first couple of years.
Right. So you've lived pretty much a very extended pandemic life.
Yes. So when that started in 2020, I'm like, not again. we just did this.
Right. I can't even, I mean, it's extremely isolating. Being a new mother, not always, but can be isolating, right? Depending on your situation. Your story on top of that, I don't know, that's quite intense.
It was.
Looking back now, and for anyone who may be in that situation, like, what are things that you'd say to them?
I think the first thing I would say is you have to take it moment by moment sometimes. And that's very hard to do. But the sooner you can train yourself to do that, the easier it will be, because it's extremely exhausting to be looking so far ahead at a milestone that you just don't know if you're going to cross yet. So the more you can train yourself to be in the present moment, moment by moment, I think that's helpful. I think knowing now what I knew, we knew that I would deliver preterm. We just didn't know how preterm. I wish that I had been able to prepare a little bit. And by prepare, I mean build out my village to go, this is what I'm going to need. I'm going to need you to check in with me. I'm going to need you to ask me how I'm doing. If I don't respond, don't take it personally, but just please don't forget me. Keep asking.
Yeah.
You know, we can't control everything, but trust in the magic of your child. I think that's like the biggest thing that both my husband and I just still to this day, we have moments where we're just watching him do his thing and we go, I can't believe we get to do this life with him.
Right.
You know, there's something a nurse said to both of us very, very early on in his NICU stay that said, there's so little we can actually predict about how this is going to go because he's a brand new person on this earth. And so we can say on paper, what does a 24-weeker do at this point or with this thing or with these health complications? But he himself as an individual is a brand new person. And so the best thing we can do is let him show us what he needs. And I think that's trickled into how both of us, me and my partner, have changed too, is we became new parents and that was a brand new identity. And so what do we need? I don't know that we could have fully predicted that, but maybe let's show each other how and show each other what we need.
Well, thanks for sharing. I'm sure that's going to be super useful to quite a few because, I mean, I can only speak from my own experience. I didn't have a high-risk pregnancy. I was, fine. So it's not even something that you think about. But then, you hear about it and you're just like, oh, there's a whole other aspect to how pregnancy can be, how new parenthood can look. That is totally foreign but still very valid and needs to be spoken about a lot more, right? So again, thanks for sharing. I'd like to ask, you have 2 children is what I believe, right? And you'd said before that once you have a high-risk pregnancy or preterm baby, the likelihood of having another is also high. Was that the case for your second one as well?
I did not actually birth her. So
okay.
when we looked through everything that happened and went wrong in my pregnancy, and we talked to, I believe it was just shy of a dozen different doctors, from reproductive endocrinologists to high-risk OBs to various other specialists. And we said, what happened here? And what's the likelihood of this happening again? And the best answer that we could get is if we do this long list of interventions, we think there's a 50% chance you can make it to 32 weeks. And those odds were not ones that we wanted to play with, because not only would that experience have been exceptionally difficult, we had a medically fragile child already at home who was still needing a lot of medical care.
Right.
So we decided that was going to be my final pregnancy.
Okay.
And so we had our second living child with the help of a gestational carrier.
Okay, amazing. Well, I'm happy for you, and also that you made that decision. It's really important to know what you can and want to go through, right, mentally and physically. You mentioned that you've also dealt with loss. At what stage would you consider yourself a parent? Is that once you have loss, or once the baby's there? Like, how would you define that, and how do you navigate, that identity? Because that is a very different identity.
Yeah. Oh, I love that you asked this. I don't think anyone's ever asked me that. Thank you. I'll tell you, so we had one loss before my son, and then we had 4 between him and my daughter. Mm-hmm. And after the first loss, because it had been a medical emergency, I hadn't even wrapped my head around that I was pregnant. And then I had to go into emergency surgery, and then that was a whole thing. And so it was a lot to process at one time. And so I remember I was recovering, I was sitting in bed, and my best friend, whose dad is the OBGYN, she came and visited. Mm-hmm. And she said, Parijat, you were pregnant. You're a mom. And I just sat there for a second, and I went, no, that didn't happen. Because that's not how I become a mom. No. And I resisted that. I really resisted that. But the days after, her words still sat with me. And I went, yeah, no, there was a child.
Right.
And if there was a child, that means I'm a parent. I just don't get to raise this child.
Right.
And so then my husband and I actually had a really profound conversation. It's probably about a week or so after the surgery, when hormones had come down and I was recovering from the surgery and I could kind of think more clearly again. And that's when we both acknowledged, yeah, we're parents. Mm-hmm. And as parents, what we wanted to do was to actually honor that loss. And so we went and we did a little memorial, just the 2 of us, mm-hmm. to honor that loss. But it took a minute to get there. Right. Because there was so much grief around how I became a parent, and that mm-hmm. the first time I became a parent is for a child I'll never get to know.
I have actually experienced this, but again, not my baby to raise right now.
Right.
Man, you've been through quite a lot. It's amazing to see you in front of me thriving, with your own company. You have quite a lot of things behind you, a best-selling book. You've had your podcast. I know you've also gotten into film. Mm-hmm. You've also done some lecturing. So you've literally set a path for yourself as a woman, a mother, a partner. It's really inspiring to see. Thank you. And for other people who have a preterm kid at home, what would you say is the one thing that you and your husband are doing at the moment to make sure that you can maintain a healthy relationship?
The first thing that came to mind, honestly, to answer that question is be really honest about how hard it's going to be. Mm-hmm. That it is a challenge on a relationship to have a preterm child, a child with medical complications, a child with disabilities, anything like that. It is a challenge. Mm-hmm. And I think if we pretend that it's not, and we try to push forward as if that isn't happening, I think it adds more strain. And I think that's something that he and I do really well, is we're very honest with each other about what aspect of this phase of life is being challenging for our relationship. I mean, certainly mm-hmm. for each other as individuals, but your needs change from what you need from your partner based on also what's happening with your child.
Right.
And there are times, for example, when he needed more medical care, and that meant that I needed more alone time because I was just so depleted. Mm-hmm. So I had to ask him for that. And that was a whole conversation about how can he hear that and not feel rejected, or not feel like I'm saying I don't want you, or this is just about me and our son and you're not included, right? And the same thing for him too. So how can we ask each other for that? I just think that raw honesty just cuts through a lot of extra unneeded challenges to add on top of the challenges you're already dealing with.
Right. Yeah. Very valuable. Honesty is one thing, but also realizing it for yourself, right? Because I think many people just can't really pinpoint and say that this is actually what I need or don't need. So yeah, that's why, like you said, it's more than just communication. It's just being honest, and not just with your partner, but yourself as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think that's something we've gotten really comfortable with, is the unknown. He can now ask me, what do you need? Because he wants to help and he wants to do something. And I can say, I have no idea. I don't know what I need right now. And he's comfortable in that space of unknown, and vice versa. I think that's helped so much, because like you said, sometimes we don't know.
That's awesome. I have another question. I know that I'd seen somewhere you have a body language journal.
Yes, body language journal. That's right.
Right. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So it's intended for people who are looking to take the first steps towards recovering from medical trauma. And we're defining that really as high-risk pregnancy, loss, and birth trauma. It's the first foundational somatic steps that you can take to start your recovery process. So what I found was that a lot of people recognize that they want to heal from what they've been through, but it feels so daunting and so scary. And, some people will say, well, I don't want to go back there and revisit that, or I don't want to talk about it anymore. Some people will say, I'm okay with that, but I don't know where to start. Some people can't find the right people to work with for any number of reasons, and that becomes challenging. So I wanted to make that initial process easy and accessible for anyone. So you grab that journal, it's sold on our website, and then it's paired with a 28-day e-course. So every day for 28 days, you get an email that's guiding you through how to use that journal. And the intention of it is to help you get back into your body, to listen to the story that your body is telling, because you don't have to remember in your mind what happened, because your body is always replaying that. You get into that, notice those patterns, and then you start to learn how to actually break those patterns somatically to help you heal from what you've been through.
Wow. That seems pretty powerful.
Yeah, I'm really proud of that journal. It's really is very powerful, and it's based off of all the work I've done with my clients, what I've done myself, so I can vouch for it personally too.
Right.
The intention for it is to lower the barriers as much as possible for people to get the relief and the healing that they're looking for and that they deserve.
Okay. And like you said, so if someone's listening and wants to get access to that, they can go to your website, right?
Yeah, just go to our shop on our website.
Okay.
And it's right there.
Awesome. Well, I think that's it on my end. Thank you so much for everything that you've shared with me today, and with everyone else who's listening.
Thank you as well. And thank you for holding such a safe space to have these conversations.
Appreciate you. Thanks. Thank you so much for tuning in and sticking around to the end. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you've just watched and enjoyed this video, I'd be so grateful for a like and if you'd hit the subscribe button. With your support, I'll be able to invite bigger guests and provide more value. If you're listening to the audio only, make sure to follow this podcast to get tips on parenting and partnership and hear inspiring stories from other parents as well. See you next week.